Hello, friend. Welcome back to another quiet journey through the science of sleep. Some nights you fall asleep so quickly you don't even remember closing your eyes. The world fades, the ceiling blurs, and somewhere between the last conscious thought and the first dream you disappear. But here's what most people don't realize: when you vanish into sleep, something else wakes up, something ancient, something that's been guarding you since before you had words for danger. Tonight, we're going to meet the part of you that never sleeps, the silent sentinel that stands watch while your mind drifts into darkness. Before we begin this journey together, if you find comfort in these quiet nights of discovery, you might like to stay a while. You can gently tap the like button, subscribe if you'd like more stories told softly, and ring the little bell, not for noise, but so the next quiet night can find you again. Now, let's drift. Picture a child sleeping through a thunderstorm. Rain hammers the windows. Thunder rolls across the sky like distant artillery. The house shakes. But the child doesn't stir. She breathes slowly, deeply, lost in some dream about horses or castles or the playground at school. To anyone watching, she seems completely unaware, utterly vulnerable. But if you could see inside her sleeping body, you'd witness something extraordinary. Her muscles are relaxed, yes. Her heartbeat has slowed. But beneath that peaceful surface, an entire network of systems is wide awake, analyzing every sound, every shift in temperature, every vibration in the mattress. Her body is running threat assessments every few seconds, sorting the world into two categories: safe and not safe. The thunder safe, the rain safe. But if a door creaked open downstairs, if footsteps crossed the hallway, if a hand reached toward her in the dark, she would wake in an instant. How does she know the difference? How does anyone? For most of human history, we got this question backwards. The ancient Egyptians believed that during sleep, the soul, the ka, would leave the body and wander. It needed protection from demons and spirits, which is why they placed protective amulets on the chest of the sleeping. The Greeks had a similar idea. They thought sleep was a kind of small death, a temporary surrender of consciousness to Hypnos, the god of sleep, brother to Thanatos, death himself. Even the word we use, unconscious, suggests that nothing is happening, that the lights are off, and nobody's home. But modern neuroscience tells a very different story. When you sleep, you're not absent, you're not gone. You've just shifted into a different mode of being, one that's older and wiser than your waking mind. In 1965, a 15-year-old boy named Randy Gardner stayed awake for 11 days straight as part of a science experiment. Researchers wanted to know what would happen if the human brain was denied sleep completely. What they discovered was remarkable. By day 4, Randy started hallucinating. By day 7, he couldn't form complete sentences. His memory failed. His mood collapsed. But here's the interesting part. Even when he was awake, his brain kept trying to sleep. It would shut down in small bursts, micro-sleeps lasting just a few seconds, during which Randy's eyes would stay open, but his mind would simply vanish. His body was desperately trying to protect him from himself. Sleep, the researchers realized, wasn't optional. It wasn't a luxury. It was something the body would fight for, even against your own will. So, what exactly is happening when you sleep? Most people think of it as a single state, an on-off switch, awake or asleep, conscious or not. But that's not how it works. Sleep is a journey through different levels of consciousness, each with its own rules, its own dangers, its own protections. You start in light sleep stage 1, where you're barely gone. A whisper could wake you. Then you descend into stage 2, where your heart rate slows and your body temperature drops. You're harder to wake now, but still reachable. Then comes deep sleep. Stage 3, where your brain waves slow into long, rolling delta waves. This is where your body does its repair work, rebuilding muscles, strengthening bones, clearing out the metabolic waste that built up during the day. You're far away now. It would take a loud noise or a strong shake to bring you back. And finally, about 90 minutes after you first close your eyes, You enter REM sleep, rapid eye movement, where dreams become vivid and strange. Your brain is almost as active as it is when you're awake, but your body is paralyzed, locked in place, so you don't act out your dreams. You're deeply asleep and intensely alert at the same time. But here's what makes all of this possible, even in the deepest sleep. Even when your conscious mind is completely offline, your body maintains a skeleton crew of awareness. Think of it like a ship at night. Most of the crew is asleep below deck. The lights are dimmed, the engines are idling. But up on the bridge, there's always someone watching the radar, scanning the horizon, ready to sound the alarm if anything dangerous appears. That's what your body is doing every single night. It's running a quiet, continuous surveillance operation, filtering the world through ancient patterns of threat and safety. Scientists call this sensory gating, and it's one of the most elegant systems in human biology. Your brain receives about 11 million bits of sensory information every second. 11 million. The feeling of your clothes against your skin, the hum of the refrigerator, the pressure of the mattress, the temperature of the air, the distant sound of traffic. If your conscious mind tried to process all of that at once, it would overload in seconds. So your brain does something brilliant. It learns what's normal, what's part of the background, and it filters it out. It builds a model of safety, and anything that fits that model gets ignored. But anything that breaks the pattern, anything unexpected, anything that doesn't belong, that gets flagged immediately and sent up the chain of command. This is why you can sleep through the sound of your own ceiling fan, which might be as loud as 60 decibels, but wake instantly to the sound of a window sliding open, which might be much quieter. The volume doesn't matter. What matters is the meaning. Your brain has learned that the fan is safe. It's been there every night for months or years. It's part of the furniture of your sleep. But the window, that's new, that's unexpected, that could be danger. And so, even though you're asleep, even though your conscious mind has no idea what's happening, your body knows. It's been paying attention all along. Let's go deeper. In the early 1980s, a researcher named Michel Jouvet did something cruel but revealing. He studied cats in REM sleep, the stage where the body is normally paralyzed. But Jouvet surgically disabled the part of the brainstem responsible for that paralysis. What happened next was astonishing. The cats, still fully asleep, began to act out their dreams. They stalked invisible prey. They pounced. They hissed and fought with enemies that didn't exist. Their bodies moved, but their minds were elsewhere. What Jouvet proved was that even in sleep, the brain is rehearsing, practicing, preparing for threats. The cats weren't just dreaming about hunting. They were training for it, keeping their survival instincts sharp even while unconscious. This wasn't rest. This was work. Human beings do the same thing, though. Our threats are different now. We don't dream about saber-toothed tigers anymore. We dream about missing deadlines, showing up to work naked, being chased by faceless figures through empty buildings. The content has changed, but the purpose hasn't. Sleep is where we practice being afraid. It's where we run simulations of disaster and learn how to survive them. And the part of you that watches over those dreams, the part that decides when a nightmare becomes too much and pulls you back to waking, that's the same guardian that keeps you safe from real danger. But who is this guardian really? Where does it live? For centuries, people thought the heart was the seat of consciousness. The Egyptians believed the heart held memory and judgment. The Greeks thought emotions came from the liver. It wasn't until the Renaissance that anatomists began to understand the brain's role. And even then, they imagined it as a kind of command center, a single intelligence giving orders. We know now that's not true. The brain is more like a parliament, a collection of different systems that argue and negotiate and sometimes override each other. And the system that guards your sleep is one of the oldest members of that parliament. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't reason or plan. It just reacts instantly based on millions of years of evolutionary trial and error. This system is built from layers. The oldest layer, the brainstem, controls your breathing and your heartbeat. It's been doing that job since before you were born, since before your ancestors were human, since before anything had a name. Above that sits the limbic system, the emotional brain, which includes the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure that specializes in fear. The amygdala is like a smoke detector. It doesn't care if you're asleep or awake. It's always scanning for threats. And when it detects something, a sudden noise, a strange smell, a shift in the environment, it floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol chemicals that wake you up fast. Above that is the cortex, the thinking brain, the part of you that reads and plans and worries about the future. During the day, the cortex is in charge. It overrides your instincts, tells you to ignore the fear, to rationalize, to stay calm. But at night, the cortex goes offline. And when it does, the older parts of you take over. Think about what that means. When you sleep, you don't become less human. You become more animal. The civilized part of you, the part that learned manners and language and logic, that part rests. But the wild part, the part that knows how to survive, that part is wide awake. And it's not alone. Your body isn't just one guardian. It's an entire army. Your skin, your ears, your nose, your sense of balance, your internal thermostat, your circadian clock, even your dreams. Each one is a specialist trained to detect a different kind of danger. And tonight, we're going to meet them one by one. We're going to learn how they work, how they communicate, how they keep you alive in the dark. Because the truth is, you've never slept alone. You've always been guarded. You just didn't know by what. So, take a breath, settle in, let your mind relax, but stay curious. Because the story we're about to tell is the story of you, the hidden you, the you that exists beneath thought and memory, the you that's been keeping watch since the moment you were born. And it starts with the largest organ you have, the one that touches the world before anything else can reach you. It starts with skin. Your skin is the border between you and everything else. Right now, as you listen to these words, it's doing something remarkable. It's touching the world in about 20,000 different places at once. The chair beneath you, the air against your arms, the fabric of your clothes, the temperature of the room. Every single point of contact is being measured, analyzed, reported back to your brain. And here's what most people never realize: this doesn't stop when you close your eyes. While you sleep, while your mind drifts through dreams or sinks into darkness, your skin stays awake. It keeps listening. It keeps watching. And it knows things your conscious mind will never notice. Let's start with a number that sounds impossible. Your skin contains approximately 2.5 million sensory receptors. 2.5 million. Each one is a tiny biological antenna tuned to detect a specific kind of signal. Some respond to pressure, others to vibration. Some to heat, some to cold, some to pain. They're not spread evenly across your body. Your fingertips are packed with them, thousands per square inch, which is why you can feel the difference between silk and sandpaper with your eyes closed. But even the parts of you that seem less sensitive, your back, your thighs, your shoulders, even those areas contain hundreds of receptors, all firing constantly, all sending information to your brain. And when you fall asleep, not a single one of them turns off. They keep working, they keep reporting, and your brain keeps listening. In the 1960s, a researcher named Alan Rechtschaffen conducted a series of experiments that changed how we think about sleep. He worked with rats, which sleep in patterns similar to humans, cycling through light sleep, deep sleep, and REM. Rechtschaffen wanted to know what would happen if he prevented rats from sleeping completely. So, he built a device, a platform, suspended over a pool of water. Whenever a rat started to fall asleep, the platform would rotate slowly, forcing the animal to walk or fall into the water. The rats could rest, could lie down, could close their eyes, but they couldn't sleep. Not truly. Within 2 weeks, every single rat in the study died. Not from drowning, not from exhaustion, from something deeper. Their immune systems collapsed. Their body temperature became erratic. They lost the ability to regulate even basic functions. But before they died, Rechtschaffen noticed something strange. Even in their final days when they were barely conscious, the rats would still react to certain touches. A light brush of a feather, no response, but a sharp poke and unexpected pressure. They would flinch, pull away, try to escape. Their bodies knew the difference. Even at the edge of death, even with their brains failing, their skin was still sorting the world into safe and dangerous. This is what your skin does every night. It runs a constant background check on reality. Most of what it detects gets filtered out, ignored, deemed irrelevant. The weight of your blanket, the pressure of your pillow, the texture of your sheets. Your brain learns these sensations within minutes of lying down, builds them into a map of what normal feels like, and then stops paying attention to them. Scientists call this sensory adaptation. It's the reason you stop feeling your watch a few minutes after you put it on, the reason you forget you're wearing glasses, the reason the hum of the air conditioner fades into silence. Your brain is conserving energy, focusing on what matters. And what matters is change. Anything new, anything unexpected, anything that doesn't fit the pattern. Imagine you're asleep. It's 3 a.m. The house is quiet. You've been dreaming about something you won't remember when you wake up. And then somewhere in that dream, something shifts. You feel it before you know what it is. A pressure on your arm. Light. Barely there. It could be nothing. Maybe a thread from your blanket brushing against your skin. Maybe a slight shift in how you're lying. But your skin doesn't guess. It measures. And what it measures is this 6 legs each one, exerting a pressure of approximately 0.001 ounces per square inch, moving in a distinctive hexagonal pattern, a mosquito. You don't wake up fully, you don't open your eyes, but your hand moves fast and automatic, swatting at the spot before your conscious mind even registers what happened. The mosquito is gone. You roll over, and within seconds, you're asleep again. You won't even remember this in the morning, but your skin will. It always remembers. Now compare that to this every night your clothes touch your skin in hundreds of places. Your shirt against your shoulders, your pants against your legs, the elastic of your underwear, the seam of your socks. All of that pressure, all of that friction is being detected by those same 2.5 million receptors. So, why don't you wake up? Why doesn't your brain treat your clothes like a threat? Because of something called predictive processing. Your brain doesn't just react to what's happening. It predicts what's going to happen based on what's happened before. And when reality matches the prediction, when the sensation fits the pattern, it gets downgraded, marked as unimportant, removed from conscious awareness. But when something breaks the pattern, when the prediction fails, that's when you wake up. That's when your skin sounds the alarm. This system is astonishingly precise. In 2007, a team of researchers at the University of California conducted an experiment where they placed tiny mechanical devices on the arms of sleeping participants. The devices could deliver vibrations at different frequencies and intensities. What they found was remarkable. During deep sleep, when participants were completely unconscious, their brains were still processing every single vibration. Electrodes measuring brain activity showed clear responses to each stimulus, but only certain patterns triggered waking. Slow rhythmic vibrations ignored. Random irregular bursts ignored. But vibrations that mimicked the pattern of an insect crawling across skin. Those woke people up almost instantly. The brain wasn't responding to the sensation itself. It was responding to the meaning of the sensation. And that meaning was millions of years old. Think about what that implies. Your ancestors slept on the ground in caves and trees in open grasslands where anything could approach in the dark. Snakes, spiders, scorpions, parasites. A single bite could mean infection, disease, death. So the ones who survived were the ones whose skin learned to recognize the signature of danger, the distinctive pattern of small legs moving across flesh. That pattern got coded into your DNA. It became instinct, And now, thousands of generations later, even though you sleep in a bed with clean sheets in a house with locked doors, your skin is still watching for spiders that aren't there. But it's not just about insects. Your skin is also monitoring temperature constantly with a precision that would impress any engineer. Embedded throughout your skin are thermoreceptors, specialized nerve endings that detect heat and cold. Some respond to warmth, others to coolness, and they work in tandem to create a thermal map of your body. This map updates several times per second, and at night it becomes even more important because your body's core temperature drops during sleep. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. Cooling down is part of what triggers sleep in the first place. Your brain needs to shed heat to function properly during rest, and your skin is the radiator that makes that possible. Here's where it gets interesting. If the room is too cold, your skin will detect it long before your brain consciously notices. Blood vessels near the surface will constrict, reducing heat loss. If that's not enough, your muscles will start to shiver, generating warmth through movement. And if the cold becomes dangerous, if your core temperature drops too low, your skin will wake you up. It will send an urgent signal to your brainstem, bypassing the usual filters, pulling you out of sleep, whether you want to wake or not. Because hypothermia doesn't wait. It doesn't give warnings. It just shuts you down, system by system, until there's nothing left to save. The same thing happens with heat, but in reverse. If the room is too warm, your skin will dilate. Blood vessels increase circulation to the surface, try to radiate excess heat into the air. You might kick off your blanket without remembering it. You might shift position, looking for a cooler spot on the mattress. And if the heat becomes too much, if your body can't regulate itself, you'll wake up drenched in sweat, confused, uncomfortable, but alive. Your skin saved you. Again. There's a tragic story that illustrates just how important this system is. In 2003, a young woman named Jessica Colotl attended a party where someone had laced the drinks with GHB, a sedative. She didn't know. She drank. And within an hour, she was unconscious. Her friends, thinking she was just drunk, laid her on a couch and went back to the party. But GHB doesn't just make you sleep. It shuts down your ability to respond to sensory input. It silences the alarms. Jessica's body temperature began to drop. Her skin detected it. It sent the signals. But the drug blocked the response. She couldn't shiver, couldn't wake. By the time someone checked on her hours later, her core temperature had fallen to 85 degrees. She survived barely, but only because someone found her in time. Her skin had been screaming for help, but the drug wouldn't let her hear it. This is the difference between natural sleep and sedation. When you sleep naturally, your protective systems stay online. Your skin keeps watch. But when you're sedated, whether by alcohol, drugs, or anesthesia, those systems get suppressed. You become vulnerable. You lose the guardian. And that's why doctors monitor you so closely during surgery, why anesthesiologists track your temperature, your heart rate, your oxygen levels. They're doing the job your skin would normally do. They're watching over you because you can't watch over yourself. But let's return to normal sleep, the kind you experience every night. There's one more aspect of your skin's vigilance that deserves attention, and it's perhaps the most sophisticated pressure sensing. Your skin doesn't just detect touch. It detects weight distribution duration. It knows the difference between resting your head on a pillow and someone placing a hand on your shoulder. It knows the difference between the mattress supporting your body and something pressing down from above. And it uses that information to keep you safe in ways you've probably never considered. Have you ever woken up because your arm fell asleep? That strange tingling sensation, the numbness, the feeling of your arm being both there and not there at the same time. That's your skin doing its job. What happened is this. You rolled over in the night and ended up lying on your arm in a way that compressed the nerves and blood vessels. Your skin detected the pressure immediately. It sent signals to your brain trying to get you to shift position. But you were deep in sleep, unreachable. So the signals got louder. The nerve compression caused those tingling sensations that pins and needles feeling specifically designed to be uncomfortable enough to wake you. And it worked. You woke up. You moved your arm. Blood flow resumed. Disaster averted. If your skin hadn't woken you, if you'd stayed in that position for hours, the nerve damage could have been permanent. But you didn't, because your skin was paying attention. Every night you make dozens of these small adjustments without knowing it. You shift your weight, you roll from side to side, you adjust your neck, your legs, your hands. None of this is random. It's all orchestrated by your skin, responding to pressure points, redistributing load, preventing any one area from being compressed for too long. Sleep scientists call these micro-arousals brief moments where your brain comes just close enough to consciousness to make a physical adjustment before sinking back into deep sleep. You won't remember them, but they happen. And they're happening because your skin never stops reporting, never stops analyzing, never stops protecting you from yourself. So here's what we know so far. Your skin is not passive. It's not just a barrier. It's an active surveillance system running 24 hours a day, processing millions of data points, filtering out the irrelevant flagging, the dangerous keeping you alive in ways you'll never consciously appreciate. It's your first line of defense, the guardian at the gate, and it works in perfect silence, asking nothing, expecting nothing, just doing its job with a precision that took millions of years to evolve. But skin is only one sense, and the dangers that approach you in the night don't always announce themselves through touch. Sometimes they whisper, sometimes they echo, sometimes they call your name from across a dark room. And when they do something else, wakes up something that's been listening all along. Right now, your ears are hearing everything: the hum of electronics, the distant murmur of traffic, the sound of your own breathing, maybe the creak of your house settling, maybe voices from another room. Your ears don't have eyelids. They can't close. They can't look away. Every vibration in the air, every pressure wave that reaches them gets converted into electrical signals and sent to your brain. But here's the strange part. You're not hearing most of it. Your brain is choosing what you notice, filtering out the constant and amplifying the unexpected. And when you sleep, this filter becomes something else entirely. It becomes a curator of danger, deciding which sounds are worth waking for, and which can be safely ignored. And the decisions it makes reveal something profound about what your body thinks will kill you. Let's start with a mystery that puzzles scientists for decades. A mother sleeps through a thunderstorm. Lightning cracks the sky, thunder shakes the windows. The noise peaks at over 90 decibels louder than a lawnmower, louder than a motorcycle. She doesn't stir. But in the next room, her baby makes a small sound barely audible, maybe 50 decibels quieter than a normal conversation. And the mother wakes instantly, eyes open, alert, moving toward the sound before she's even fully conscious. How does her brain know the difference? How does it decide that one sound matters and the other doesn't? The answer lies in something called selective attention during sleep. And it's one of the most elegant survival mechanisms in human biology. In 1953, a psychologist named Colin Cherry published a paper that would change how we think about hearing. He was studying what he called the cocktail party effect, the ability to focus on one conversation in a noisy room full of people talking. Cherry played 2 different spoken messages into headphones, one in each ear, and asked participants to repeat what they heard in just one ear while ignoring the other. What he found was remarkable. People could do it perfectly. They could shadow one voice while completely tuning out the other. But then he tested something else. He slipped the participant's own name into the ignored ear. And almost everyone noticed. Their attention snapped to that ear immediately. The name broke through the filter. It demanded recognition. Cherry realized that the brain wasn't just passively hearing sounds, it was actively sorting them, running every incoming signal through a priority system, looking for meaning, looking for relevance, looking for danger. A few years later in 1960, a researcher named Ian Oswald took Cherry's work further. He wanted to know if this selective attention continued during sleep. So he recruited volunteers and monitored their brain activity with electroencephalography, EEG, while playing them recordings of different sounds. Some sounds were meaningless, random tones, white noise, instrumental music. Others were meaningful spoken words, the volunteer's own name, words associated with threat or urgency. And what Oswald discovered was astonishing. During deep sleep, when volunteers were completely unconscious, their brains showed no response to the meaningless sounds. The EEG traces stayed smooth and slow, undisturbed. But when meaningful sounds played, especially the volunteer's name or words like fire or danger, the brain activity spiked. Certain structures deep in the brain, the hippocampus and the amygdala, would activate immediately, analyzing the sound, assessing its importance. Most of the time, they'd decide it wasn't worth waking for. The volunteers stayed asleep, but the brain had heard. It had listened. It had made a choice. This is what your ears are doing right now every night. They're running a continuous threat assessment, sorting the auditory world into categories: safe, neutral, and dangerous. And the categories are surprisingly specific. Let's talk about what makes a sound dangerous enough to wake you. Volume alone doesn't do it. You can sleep through a train passing if it happens every night at the same time. Your brain learns the pattern, marks it as expected, and filters it out. But a single loud sound that's unexpected, a door slamming, a glass breaking, that will wake you almost every time. It's not the volume, it's the novelty. Your brain is looking for changes in the baseline, deviations from the norm. And when it finds one, it assumes the worst. But there's something deeper happening here, something that reveals just how ancient this system is. Certain sounds wake us more easily than others, regardless of context, regardless of experience. The sound of a baby crying, for example, is almost impossible to sleep through, even if it's not your baby, even if you've never had children. Researchers have found that the frequency range of an infant's cry, between 300 and 500 hertz, activates the amygdala more strongly than almost any other sound. This isn't learned, it's hardwired. Babies that could cry loud enough to wake their parents survived. Babies that couldn't, didn't. And so, over thousands of generations, human brains evolved to treat that specific frequency as an emergency broadcast, a sound that overrides everything else. The same thing happens with screams. A true scream, not the playful kind, but the raw, guttural sound of terror, has a distinctive acoustic signature. It's rough modulated between 40 and 80 hertz, creating what scientists call roughness in the sound wave. And that roughness triggers the amygdala faster than any smooth tonal sound. Your brain recognizes it as a distress signal, something that might indicate you or someone near you is in danger. And it responds accordingly, pulling you from sleep, flooding your body with adrenaline, preparing you to fight or flee. All of this happens in less than a second. You wake up already afraid, already moving, with no memory of the decision being made. Now, let's talk about the sounds that don't wake you and why. Your air conditioner runs all night. It's a constant hum, maybe 60 or 70 decibels. That's as loud as a dishwasher, loud enough that you couldn't ignore it during the day. But at night, you don't hear it. Or rather, your ears hear it, but your brain discards it. Within minutes of lying down, your auditory cortex builds a model of the background noise in your environment. It says, "This is normal. This is safe. This is the sound of nothing happening." And then it stops reporting it to your conscious mind. The signal still reaches your brain. The neurons still fire, but they fire in a predictable pattern, a steady rhythm that your higher cognitive functions learn to ignore. This is called habituation. And it's how your brain conserves energy, how it avoids drowning in irrelevant information. But here's where it gets tricky. If that air conditioner suddenly stops, if the hum disappears, you might wake up. Not because of noise, but because of silence. Your brain has learned that the hum is part of safety. It's part of the normal pattern. And when the pattern breaks, even if the break is quieter, your brain notices. It sends a query: why did the sound stop? Is something wrong? And sometimes that query is enough to pull you into wakefulness, into a brief moment of confusion, where you lie there wondering what woke you, never realizing it was the absence of sound, not the presence of it. There's a beautiful experiment that demonstrates this. In the 1970s, researchers studied people who live near airports. These were people who'd been hearing planes take off and land for years, sometimes dozens of flights per night. When researchers monitored their sleep, they found something surprising. Most of the time, the planes didn't wake them. Their brains had adapted, learned to classify the sound as non-threatening, but occasionally a plane would wake them, and it was never the loudest plane or the closest one. It was always a plane that sounded different, a different engine, type, a different altitude, a different flight path. The brain wasn't responding to volume. It was responding to novelty. It was saying this sound doesn't fit the pattern. Wake up. Check. Now let's go deeper. Why does a mother wake to her baby's cry, but not her partner's snoring? Why can you sleep through a smoke alarm's low battery chirp, but wake instantly to the sound of breaking glass? The answer is something called semantic processing during sleep. Your brain doesn't just analyze sounds for volume and frequency. It analyzes them for meaning. And it does this even when you're completely unconscious. Studies using functional MRI have shown that during REM sleep, when people are dreaming, the language centers of the brain remain partially active. If you play someone a recording of sentences, their brain will light up differently for grammatical sentences versus nonsense sentences. The brain is still parsing language, still extracting meaning, still trying to understand what's being said. And if what's being said is important, if it's relevant to survival or safety, the brain will wake you. This has profound implications. It means your sleeping brain knows who you are. It knows your name. It knows the names of people you care about. It knows words associated with danger or urgency. And it listens for them, constantly filtering through every sound in your environment, looking for those specific patterns. This is why a parent can sleep through a hurricane, but wake to a whisper of mom or dad from across the house. The whisper has meaning. The hurricane doesn't. But there's a darker side to this, a vulnerability that reveals just how much your brain depends on context to make these decisions. In 2011, a man in Portland, Oregon died in a house fire. He was asleep when the fire started. His smoke alarm went off. It was working perfectly, producing 110 decibels loud enough to cause hearing damage if you stood next to it. But he didn't wake up. Investigators were baffled. How could someone sleep through that? And then they found the answer. The man had been a firefighter for 20 years. He'd spent thousands of hours training with alarms, hearing them go off in drills, in simulations, in controlled environments where there was no real danger. His brain had learned that the sound of a smoke alarm didn't mean wake up and run. It meant stand by, wait for instructions. And so, when the real alarm went off, his brain did what it had been trained to do. It stayed calm. It stayed asleep. And he died. This is the risk of habituation. Your brain learns too well. It becomes too efficient at filtering, and sometimes it filters out the very things that should save you. This is why experts recommend changing the sound of your smoke alarm occasionally, or installing alarms with voice alerts. Human voice is saying fire instead of just a tone. Because your brain can't habituate to language the same way it habituates to sound. Words mean something. Words demand processing. Words break through. Let's return to something simpler, something almost everyone has experienced. You're asleep. You're dreaming. And somewhere in that dream, a phone rings. Maybe it's an old rotary phone. Maybe it's a cell phone. Maybe it's a phone that doesn't exist in waking life, some dream logic version of communication. And then you wake up and you realize there's a phone ringing. Your actual phone in the real world. Your dream incorporated the sound, wove it into the narrative, turned it into something that made sense within the dream's internal logic. But eventually, the sound became too persistent, too loud, too real. And your brain said, "This doesn't belong here. Wake up. Check." How did that happen? How did a sound from the external world enter your dream before it woke you? The answer is that your brain processes sounds on multiple levels simultaneously. The lower levels, the brainstem and the thalamus, they receive the raw auditory signal immediately. They analyze it for basic features, frequency, volume, pattern, but they don't wake you. Instead, they pass the information to the cortex, to the parts of your brain responsible for storytelling and interpretation. And the cortex, even while dreaming, tries to make sense of the sound. It fits it into the dream, it gives it a narrative purpose. And as long as the sound fits, as long as the cortex can explain it within the dream's framework, you stay asleep. But when the sound persists, when it doesn't resolve, when it keeps demanding attention, the lower levels override the cortex. They send a louder signal, a more urgent signal, and that signal pulls you out of the dream and into waking. This entire system, this auditory vigilance is exhausting in a way you never consciously feel. Your ears don't rest. They can't. They're always on, always listening, always processing. But your brain compensates by becoming incredibly efficient. It learns what matters and what doesn't. It builds maps of safety profiles of normalcy. And it only bothers you, only pulls you into consciousness when something truly unexpected happens. The rest of the time, it handles everything on its own, in silence, letting you sleep while it keeps watch. But ears are not the only sense that works this way. There's another guardian one that operates even more quietly, one that can detect dangers your ears would never notice. It doesn't listen for sound. It listens for something older, something more primal, something that drifts through the air like a warning written in molecules. Smell is the forgotten sense. We talk about what we see, what we hear, what we touch. But smell operates in the background, quiet and constant, translating the chemical world into something your brain can understand. And unlike every other sense, smell has a direct line to the oldest parts of your brain, the parts that existed before language, before thought, before you had a name for fear. When you smell smoke, you don't think about fire and then feel afraid. You feel afraid first, instantly, automatically, and only later does your conscious mind catch up and ask why. This is because your olfactory system, your sense of smell, bypasses the thalamus, the relay station that processes every other sensory input. It connects directly to the amygdala and the hippocampus, to emotion and memory, to survival. And when you sleep, when your eyes are closed and your ears are filtering and your conscious mind is gone, your nose stays vigilant. It keeps sampling the air. It keeps searching for danger. And it knows exactly what to look for. Let's begin with a number that sounds almost impossible. You have approximately 400 different types of olfactory receptors in your nose. 400. Each one is a protein folded into a specific shape designed to detect a specific molecule or family of molecules. Some detect floral scents. Others detect rot. Some respond to sulfur compounds, the smell of decay or gas leaks. Others respond to smoke particles, to burning wood or plastic or fabric. And these receptors don't sleep. They don't turn off. Every breath you take, even while unconscious, pulls air across these receptors. They bind to whatever molecules are present, send signals through the olfactory bulb, and report their findings to the brain. And the brain listens always because smell is the sense that can save your life before you even know you're in danger. In 2004, Linda Buck and Richard Axel were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovering how the olfactory system works. They mapped the genes that code for smell receptors, showed how each receptor responds to specific chemical structures, and explained how the brain combines signals from multiple receptors to identify thousands of different odors. But here's what most people don't know about their research. They also discovered that olfactory processing continues during sleep. In one experiment, they exposed sleeping mice to the scent of almond, extract a smell the mice had been conditioned to associate with mild electric shocks. Even in deep sleep, the mice showed immediate physiological responses. Their heart rates increased, their breathing quickened, their brains showed activity in the amygdala, and the periaqueductal gray areas associated with fear and defensive behavior. The mice didn't wake up, but their bodies prepared to wake up. They shifted into a lighter stage of sleep, closer to consciousness, ready to respond if the threat became real. The smell alone was enough to change the architecture of their sleep. Humans do the same thing, though we're less sensitive than mice overall. Our sense of smell is weaker, more easily overridden by other senses. But during sleep, when vision and hearing are compromised, smell becomes more important. It becomes a primary line of defense. And certain smells, certain chemical signatures will wake you no matter how deeply you're sleeping. Smoke is the most obvious example. The scent of burning material, whether it's wood, plastic, fabric, or paper, contains a mixture of volatile organic compounds and particulates that your olfactory receptors are exquisitely tuned to detect. Even concentrations as low as a few parts per million can trigger a response. And that response is fast. Faster than you'd expect. Rachel Hertz, a neuroscientist at Brown University, conducted a series of experiments in the early 2000s that revealed just how quickly the sleeping brain responds to dangerous smells. She brought volunteers into a sleep lab, monitored their brain activity, and exposed them to different odors while they slept. Some odors were neutral peppermint lavender, fresh-cut grass. Others were associated with danger smoke, natural gas, the smell of spoiled food. What she found was striking. Neutral odors barely registered. The brain processed them, yes, but it didn't react. The volunteers stayed asleep undisturbed, but dangerous odors triggered an immediate cascade. Within 3 seconds, brain activity spiked in the amygdala, and the insular regions involved in threat detection and disgust. Within 5 seconds, the volunteers began to shift in their sleep, moving toward lighter stages. And within 10 seconds, many of them woke up completely often, with no memory of what had roused them, just a vague sense of unease. But here's the fascinating part. Pleasant odors, even strong ones, didn't wake anyone. Hertz exposed volunteers to the scent of fresh flowers, baking bread, even chocolate. These are smells that most people love, smells that can fill a room and dominate your attention during the day. But at night, they were ignored. The brain registered them, processed them, but deemed them irrelevant. There was no threat, no reason to wake. Your nose, it turns out, is not interested in pleasure while you sleep. It's only interested in survival. This makes evolutionary sense. For most of human history, sleep was dangerous. You were vulnerable, lying still in the dark, unable to see predators or rivals approaching. But you could smell them. You could smell the smoke from their fires. You could smell the decay of a carcass nearby, indicating the presence of scavengers or the spread of disease. You could smell the change in the air before a storm, the ozone and moisture that warned of lightning and flooding. And so, the humans who survived were the ones whose noses kept working while they slept, the ones who could detect danger through chemistry alone. That ability is still with you, coded into your DNA, functioning every single night, even though the threats have changed. Let's talk about one specific threat: carbon monoxide. It's a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas produced when fuel burns incompletely. Faulty furnaces, gas leaks, running cars, and closed garages. It's called the silent killer because you can't sense it with any of your conscious faculties. You can't see it, you can't hear it, and you can't smell it, at least not directly. But your body knows when it's there. Carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin in your blood more tightly than oxygen does. It starves your cells of oxygen without you realizing it. You get tired, you get confused, you fall asleep, and if the levels are high enough, you never wake up. But here's the critical detail. Before that happens, before unconsciousness becomes permanent, your olfactory system sometimes detects the byproducts of incomplete combustion, the smoke particles, the sulfur compounds, the chemical fingerprint that indicates something is burning wrong. And if it detects those compounds early enough, it can wake you. It can give you a chance to escape. There's a tragic case that illustrates both the power and the limitation of this system. In 2019, a family of 4 in Michigan died from carbon monoxide poisoning while they slept. Investigators found that their furnace had malfunctioned, leaking gas into the house throughout the night. The family had a carbon monoxide detector, but the battery was dead. They had no alarm. And because carbon monoxide itself is odorless, their noses couldn't detect it directly. But here's what haunts the investigation. The family's dog, which slept in the basement near the furnace, survived. It had woken up at some point, scratched at the door, tried to get out. Dogs have a more sensitive olfactory system than humans. They can detect changes in air composition that we can't. The dog smelled something wrong. It tried to warn them. But by the time anyone might have noticed, it was too late. The humans never woke. Their noses, their olfactory guardians, never received the signal they needed. This is the vulnerability of the system. It's incredibly good at detecting what it's designed to detect, but it's blind to everything else. Your nose can wake you for smoke, but not for carbon monoxide. It can wake you for the smell of gas, but not for radiation or slow-acting poisons. It's an ancient system honed for ancient threats, and the modern world has invented dangers it was never built to handle. This is why we need technology, why we need detectors and alarms, because our biological guardians, as sophisticated as they are, have limits. But within those limits, your nose is astonishingly capable. Let's talk about something more common, something almost everyone has experienced waking up, because something smells wrong. Maybe it's the smell of something burning in the kitchen, a forgotten pan on the stove. Maybe it's the smell of a pet that's gotten sick in the night. Maybe it's just the smell of mildew or dampness indicating a leak or a problem with ventilation. You wake up with your nose pulling you toward the source of the smell before you're even fully conscious. This is your olfactory system doing its job, alerting you to a change in your environment that might indicate a problem. And it does this without asking permission, without waiting for you to decide whether you want to wake up. It just acts. There's a subtlety here worth exploring. Your nose doesn't just detect smells, it also detects the absence of smells. If you sleep in a room with a particular scent, maybe a candle or a diffuser, or just the smell of your own laundry detergent, your olfactory receptors build that scent into their baseline. They say this is normal, this is safe. And if that scent suddenly disappears, if the chemical composition of the air changes in a way that removes familiar odors, your brain notices. It sends a query. It wonders why. And sometimes that's enough to wake you. This is rare, less common than waking to a new smell, but it happens. It's your brain's way of saying something has changed, and change might mean danger. Now, let's go deeper into the biology. Why does smell bypass the thalamus? Why does it have this direct connection to the amygdala and the hippocampus? The answer lies in evolutionary history. Smell is one of the oldest senses, one of the first ways that primitive organisms interacted with their environment. Long before eyes or ears, before anything we'd recognize as a brain, there were chemical receptors that allowed single-celled organisms to move toward nutrients and away from toxins. As organisms became more complex, as brains evolved, those chemical receptors became specialized. They became what we now call the olfactory system. And because they were already connected to the most primitive parts of the developing brain, the parts responsible for survival and emotion, they stayed connected. They never needed the thalamus, the relay station, that evolved later to handle vision and hearing and touch. Smell was already wired directly into the core of what it means to be alive. This direct connection has consequences. It means smells trigger emotions faster than any other stimulus. A scent can bring back a memory from childhood in an instant, complete with all the feelings attached to that memory. This is called the Proustian phenomenon, named after Marcel Proust, who wrote about the way the smell of a Madeleine cake transported him back to his youth. But it also means that threatening smells trigger fear faster than any other stimulus. You smell smoke, and you're afraid before you know why. You smell decay, and you feel disgust before you've identified the source. Your olfactory system doesn't give you time to think. It just makes you feel, and that feeling drives action. But here's a question. Worth considering, what if you lose your sense of smell? It's more common than you might think. Anosmia, the medical term for the inability to smell, affects millions of people. Some are born with it. Others lose it due to injury, illness, or age. And during the COVID pandemic, millions more experienced temporary anosmia as a symptom of infection. What happens to those people at night? Are they more vulnerable? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. Studies have shown that people with anosmia are significantly more likely to die in house fires, not because they're less intelligent or less careful, but because they lack that early warning system. Their noses can't wake them. They don't smell the smoke until it's too late, until the air is thick and the exits are blocked. This is why doctors recommend that people with anosmia install multiple smoke detectors, use devices with loud alarms and flashing lights, and sleep with doors closed to slow the spread of smoke. They have to compensate for the loss of a guardian they didn't know they had. For the rest of us, the ones whose noses still work, there's a strange comfort in knowing that even in sleep, even when we're at our most vulnerable, this ancient system is still watching, still sampling, still protecting. Your nose is a chemical sentinel, analyzing every breath, sorting molecules into safe and dangerous, keeping you alive in ways you'll never consciously notice. And it asks nothing in return. It doesn't need your attention. It doesn't need your gratitude. It just does its job quietly in the dark every single night. But smell is not the only invisible guardian. There's another system, one that operates in a dimension you rarely think about. One that tracks something even more fundamental than sound or scent. It tracks space itself, the position of your body in the world, the orientation of your head, the pull of gravity. And when you sleep, when you surrender to stillness, this system remains awake, ensuring you don't fall, don't roll, don't lose yourself in the dark. Close your eyes right now and tilt your head to one side. You know exactly where your head is in space, even without looking. You know which direction is up. You know if you're leaning forward or backward. You know if you're moving or standing still. This awareness feels automatic, almost trivial, like something that just happens without effort. But it's not trivial. It's the result of one of the most sophisticated sensory systems in your body, a system so precise that it can detect movements smaller than the width of a human hair. So fast that it updates your brain's understanding of the world hundreds of times per second. And here's what makes it remarkable for our purposes. This system never sleeps. While you drift through dreams, while your consciousness dissolves into darkness, your vestibular system keeps tracking your position, keeps monitoring gravity, keeps ensuring that you don't roll off the bed, don't fall, don't lose yourself in the void. It's the guardian of space, the keeper of orientation, and it works in total silence. Let's start with the anatomy, because understanding what this system is helps us understand what it does. Deep inside your inner ear, on both sides of your head, there's a structure called the vestibular labyrinth. It's a series of fluid-filled chambers and tubes, each designed to detect a different kind of movement. The three semicircular canals are arranged at right angles to each other, like the axes of three-dimensional space. One detects rotation in the horizontal plane, like shaking your head no. Another detects rotation in the vertical plane, like nodding yes. The third detects tilting, like leaning your head toward your shoulder. Each canal is filled with a fluid called endolymph, and at the base of each canal is a structure called the cupula, a gelatinous mass embedded with hair cells. When your head moves, the fluid lags behind slightly due to inertia, bending the cupula and stimulating the hair cells. Those hair cells send electrical signals through the vestibular nerve to your brainstem, telling your brain exactly how you're moving and in which direction. But the semicircular canals aren't the whole system. There are also two other structures, the utricle and the saccule, which detect linear acceleration and the position of your head relative to gravity. Inside these structures are tiny crystals of calcium carbonate called otoliths, literally ear stones. These crystals rest on a membrane covered with hair cells. When you move your head, when you accelerate or decelerate when gravity pulls on your body, the otoliths shift, bending the hair cells beneath them. And just like the semicircular canals, these hair cells send signals to your brain, creating a continuous map of where you are in space. The entire system updates your brain about 300 times per second. 300. That's faster than you can blink, faster than you can think. And it happens all the time, awake or asleep, conscious or not. Now, here's the question. Why does this matter for sleep? Why does your brain need to know where you are when you're lying still in bed? The answer becomes clear when you look at what happens when the system fails. In 1875, an Austrian physicist named Ernst Mach began studying the vestibular system, trying to understand how it contributed to the sensation of motion. He built rotating chairs and centrifuges devices that could spin people in different directions while he monitored their responses. What he discovered was unsettling. When he disrupted someone's vestibular system, either by spinning them rapidly or by introducing conflicting sensory information, they lost all sense of orientation. They couldn't tell which way was up. They couldn't tell if they were moving or still. Some people became nauseated, others panicked. A few reported feeling like they were falling even though they were sitting safely in a chair. Mach realized that the vestibular system wasn't just providing information, it was providing certainty. It was the sense that anchored you to reality, the sense that told you where your body ended and the world began. When you sleep, you lose most of your other anchors. Your eyes are closed, your muscles are relaxed, your conscious mind is offline. But your vestibular system stays active, keeps providing that sense of orientation, keeps telling your brain where you are. And this is critical because your sleeping brain still needs to protect you from falling. Think about it. You spend roughly a third of your life asleep, lying on a surface that's usually elevated above the ground, a bed, a couch, a hammock. If your brain completely shut down its awareness of position and balance, you'd roll off that surface constantly. You'd wake up on the floor every morning, bruised and confused. But you don't. You stay on the bed. You adjust your position throughout the night, shifting your weight, rolling from side to side, but you never cross the edge. How does your brain know where the edge is? Researchers at the University of Toronto studied this in the late 1990s. They monitored people sleeping in beds of different sizes, from narrow cots to king-size mattresses, and tracked their movements throughout the night. What they found was fascinating. People adjusted their movement patterns based on the size of the bed. On a narrow cot, they stayed near the center, making small, cautious movements. On a large bed, they spread out, moving more freely, using more of the available space. But in both cases, they almost never fell off. The brain had somehow mapped the boundaries of the sleeping surface and was using that map to constrain movement. And the system responsible for creating that map was the vestibular system, working in conjunction with proprioception, the body's sense of where its limbs are in space. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Your vestibular system doesn't just prevent you from falling off the bed, it also prevents you from injuring yourself while you sleep. During REM sleep, the stage where dreams are most vivid, your body enters a state of temporary paralysis called atonia. This paralysis prevents you from acting out your dreams, from moving your arms and legs in response to whatever's happening in your mind. But the paralysis isn't complete. Your diaphragm still works, allowing you to breathe. Your eyes still move, hence rapid eye movement. And your vestibular system still functions, still monitors your position. If your head starts to roll into a position that could obstruct your airway, if your neck bends at an angle that could compress blood vessels or nerves, your vestibular system detects it. It sends an alarm to your brainstem, and your brainstem overrides the atonia just for a moment, just long enough to shift your head into a safer position. You never wake up. You never remember it. But it happens dozens of times per night, keeping you safe from the dangers of your own sleep. Let's talk about what happens when this system is compromised. Alcohol is one of the most common disruptors of vestibular function. When you drink, ethanol enters your bloodstream and eventually reaches the endolymph, the fluid in your semicircular canals. But it doesn't distribute evenly. It changes the density of the fluid, creating abnormal currents that your hair cells interpret as movement. This is why the room seems to spin when you're drunk, why you feel dizzy even when you're lying still. Your vestibular system is sending signals that don't match reality, and your brain doesn't know which signals to trust. And at night, when you're asleep, this becomes dangerous. People who go to sleep drunk are far more likely to fall out of bed than sober people. Their vestibular system is compromised, unable to accurately map the boundaries of the sleeping surface, unable to warn them when they're getting too close to the edge. Some people fall and hurt themselves. Others roll into positions that restrict their breathing and never wake up to correct it. This is one of the reasons why alcohol-related deaths during sleep are more common than most people realize. There's another condition worth discussing, one that reveals just how dependent we are on the vestibular system for safety during sleep. It's called benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, or BPPV, and it happens when those tiny calcium carbonate crystals, the otoliths, become dislodged from their usual position and drift into the semicircular canals. When you move your head, the crystals tumble through the fluid-stimulating hair cells that shouldn't be stimulated, sending false signals to your brain. The result is intense vertigo, a sensation of spinning or falling that can be completely debilitating, and it often happens at night. People with BPPV frequently wake up feeling like they're being thrown out of bed, like the room is rotating around them. Their vestibular system is malfunctioning, sending panic signals even though they're lying perfectly still. The fear is real. The danger feels immediate, but it's all internal, all a failure of the guardian that's supposed to keep them safe. Now, let's go deeper into evolutionary history, because the vestibular system is ancient, far more ancient than you might think. The basic structure, the semicircular canals and otolith organs, appeared in vertebrates over 500 million years ago. Fish have them, reptiles have them, birds have them, mammals have them. The design has remained remarkably consistent across all these species because it works. It solves a fundamental problem. How does an organism know where it is in three-dimensional space? And the answer, refined over millions of years of evolution, is to put fluid-filled tubes inside the head and use inertia to detect movement. It's elegant, it's efficient, and it's irreplaceable. But here's something most people don't know. Your vestibular system also plays a role in memory consolidation during sleep. Recent research has shown that the hippocampus, the part of your brain responsible for forming long-term memories, receives input from the vestibular system. This input helps create what's called a spatial framework for memories, a sense of where you were when an event occurred. And during sleep, especially during slow-wave sleep, the hippocampus replays the events of the day, sorting through experiences, deciding what to keep and what to discard. The vestibular system contributes to this process by providing spatial context. It helps your brain remember not just what happened, but where it happened, how you were oriented, how you moved through space. This is why people who experience vestibular dysfunction often report problems with memory. The system isn't just about balance. It's about understanding your place in the world. Let's talk about children, because they offer a clear example of how the vestibular system develops and why it matters for sleep. Infants have a functional vestibular system from birth, but it's not fully mature. The connections between the vestibular organs and the brain are still forming, still learning to interpret signals correctly. This is why babies have poor head control at first, why they can't sit up or stand without support. But it's also why babies sometimes fall out of their cribs or roll off changing tables. Their vestibular system hasn't yet learned to map boundaries, to recognize edges, to constrain movement. By around 6 months, most babies have developed enough vestibular function to start preventing falls during sleep. They learn to stay centered in their cribs to avoid rolling too far in any direction. But even then, the system isn't perfect. Toddlers fall out of bed more often than adults because their vestibular spatial mapping is still developing. They're still learning where the edges are still calibrating the guardian. Now consider the opposite end of life. As people age, the vestibular system begins to deteriorate. The hair cells in the semicircular canals become less sensitive. The otoliths can degrade or become dislodged more easily. The neural connections between the vestibular organs and the brain weaken. And the result is that older adults are much more likely to fall both during waking hours and during sleep. Studies have shown that people over 65 are significantly more likely to roll out of bed at night than younger adults. Their vestibular guardian is failing. It's still working, still trying to protect them, but it's not as fast or as accurate as it used to be. This is one of the reasons why hospitals use bed rails for elderly patients, why nursing homes pad the floors beside beds. They're compensating for a guardian that's losing its edge. But even in a healthy adult, even with a fully functional vestibular system, there are limits. The system can be fooled. It can be overwhelmed. Astronauts experience this in space, where there's no gravity to provide a consistent down direction. Their vestibular systems keep functioning, keep sending signals, but the signals don't make sense anymore. There's no weight pulling on the otoliths. There's no consistent orientation. And as a result, astronauts often report severe disorientation during sleep. They wake up not knowing which way is up, not knowing where they are in the space station, sometimes not even sure if they're awake or still dreaming. It takes weeks for their brains to adapt, to learn to ignore the vestibular signals that no longer provide useful information. And even then, when they return to Earth, they have to readjust all over again. Their guardians have to relearn gravity. Here's a question worth pondering. Have you ever had a dream where you were falling? Most people have. It's one of the most common dream experiences across all cultures. You're standing somewhere high, or you're just floating, and then suddenly you're dropping, plummeting, and you wake up with a jolt, your heart racing, your body tense. Why does this happen? Scientists believe it's related to the vestibular system. During the transition from waking to sleeping, as your muscles relax and your body shifts, position your vestibular system sometimes detects movement that your brain interprets as falling. Your conscious mind is offline, but the primitive parts of your brain, the parts responsible for survival, they react. They send an alarm. They flood your body with adrenaline, and you wake up confused and startled, rescued from a fall that was never real. This is the vestibular guardian in action, protecting you from a threat that exists only in the borderland between waking and sleep. It's imperfect. It makes mistakes. But those mistakes are always on the side of caution. Better to wake you for a fall that didn't happen than to let you sleep through a fall that did. So here we are, suspended in space, held in place by a system we barely think about, protected by a guardian we can't see or hear or consciously feel. The vestibular system is working right now as you listen to these words. It's tracking your position, updating your brain, keeping you oriented. And when you sleep, it will keep working. It will keep you safe. It will keep you from falling, not because it wants gratitude or recognition, but because that's what it does. That's all it's ever done. For 500 million years, through fish and reptiles and mammals and humans, it has kept us grounded, kept us oriented, kept us alive. And it will keep doing so quietly and visibly until the very end. But position and balance are not the only invisible constants. There's another force at work while you sleep, another system monitoring something so fundamental you might not even think of it as a sense. It's tracking the temperature of your body and the temperature of the world, negotiating between them, keeping you alive in the narrow zone where life can exist. You've probably never thought about the temperature of your brain. Right now, deep inside your skull, your core body temperature is hovering around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the number everyone knows, the baseline, the normal. But here's what most people don't realize: that number isn't constant. It fluctuates throughout the day and night, rising and falling in a careful rhythm that your body orchestrates with astonishing precision. And when you sleep, something remarkable happens. Your core temperature drops sometimes by as much as 2 degrees, entering a range that would be considered hypothermic if it happened during the day. But this isn't a malfunction. This cooling is intentional necessary part of what allows your brain to rest and repair itself. And the system that manages this temperature dance that keeps you from freezing or overheating in the dark is one of the most sophisticated regulatory networks in biology. It works silently, constantly monitoring thousands of data points across your body, making adjustments you'll never consciously notice, keeping you alive in the narrow thermal zone where human life can exist. Let's begin with the sensors, because you have far more of them than you might imagine. Embedded throughout your skin are specialized nerve endings called thermoreceptors. There are two main types, cold receptors and warm receptors. Cold receptors fire more rapidly when the temperature drops below a certain threshold, usually around 86 degrees Fahrenheit on the skin's surface. Warm receptors do the opposite, increasing their firing rate when temperature rises above 95 degrees. But these receptors aren't evenly distributed. You have more of them in your face, your hands, your feet, areas of your body that are most exposed to the environment, most likely to encounter dangerous temperature extremes. And you have far more cold receptors than warm ones, about 3-to-1. This asymmetry exists because throughout most of human evolution, cold was the bigger threat. Heat could be escaped by finding shade or water, but cold, especially at night, could kill you slowly, quietly, without warning. Now, here's the part that matters for sleep. These thermoreceptors don't turn off when you close your eyes. They keep sampling the environment, keep sending signals to your hypothalamus, a small region deep in your brain that acts as your body's thermostat. The hypothalamus receives input from thermoreceptors all over your body, compares that input to its internal set point, and then makes decisions. If you're too cold, it constricts blood vessels near your skin, reducing heat loss. It triggers shivering, forcing your muscles to burn energy and generate warmth. If you're too hot, it dilates blood vessels, increases blood flow to the skin, and activates your sweat glands. And all of this happens automatically without conscious thought, driven by feedback loops that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. But during sleep, the hypothalamus does something strange. It lowers the set point. It decides essentially that your body should be cooler than it is during the day. This isn't random. It's part of the circadian rhythm, the 24-hour cycle that governs almost every biological process in your body. Around 2 to 4 in the morning, your core temperature reaches its lowest point, sometimes dropping to 96 or 97 degrees. And this cooling is essential for deep sleep. Studies have shown that people who can't lower their core temperature during sleep experience fragmented, poor quality rest. Their brains can't enter the deeper stages of non-REM sleep, where most repair and consolidation happens. The cooling isn't just a side effect of sleep, it's a requirement. Matthew Walker, a sleep researcher at UC Berkeley, has studied this phenomenon extensively. In one experiment, he brought participants into a sleep lab and manipulated the ambient temperature of their sleeping environment. Some people slept in rooms kept at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, cool but comfortable. Others slept in rooms at 75 degrees warmer, but still within a normal range. What he found was striking. People in the cooler rooms fell asleep faster, stayed asleep longer, and spent more time in deep sleep. People in the warmer rooms took longer to fall asleep, woke more frequently, and showed less slow-wave activity on their EEGs. The difference wasn't huge, just 7 degrees, but it was enough to significantly impact sleep quality. And the reason Walker discovered was that the cooler environment helped the body reach its target core temperature more efficiently. The hypothalamus didn't have to work as hard to shed heat. It could focus on other tasks, other aspects of maintaining homeostasis during rest. But here's where the system reveals its vigilance. Your thermoreceptors are constantly monitoring for dangerous temperature extremes, and they will wake you if those extremes are detected. Let's talk about cold first, because it's the more immediate threat. Hypothermia begins when your core temperature drops below 95 degrees. At first, the symptoms are subtle: confusion, slurred speech, loss of coordination. But as temperature continues to fall, the body starts shutting down non-essential functions to preserve the core. Blood flow to the extremities decreases. Metabolism slows. And eventually, if the temperature drops below 90 degrees, cardiac arrest becomes likely. But long before that happens, long before your core temperature reaches dangerous levels, your skin's thermoreceptors will detect the cold. They'll send urgent signals to your hypothalamus. And your hypothalamus will wake you. It will pull you out of sleep with a jolt of adrenaline, a sudden awareness that something is wrong. You'll feel cold, deeply cold in a way that demands action. And you'll act, pulling on blankets, adjusting the thermostat, moving to a warmer location. The guardian saved you again from a danger you might not have consciously recognized. There's a tragic case that illustrates what happens when this system fails. In January 2014, an elderly woman in Pennsylvania was found dead in her home. The heating system had broken during the night, and the indoor temperature had dropped to near freezing. Investigators were puzzled because she was in bed under blankets in a position that suggested she'd never woken up. Why hadn't she noticed the cold? Why hadn't she called for help? The autopsy revealed the answer: she had advanced diabetes, which had damaged the nerves in her extremities, including her thermoreceptors. She literally couldn't feel the cold. Her body was freezing, but her brain never received the signal. Her hypothalamus never woke her. She died in her sleep, killed by a silence in the system that should have screamed. Now, let's talk about heat, because it presents a different kind of danger. Unlike cold, which usually wakes you before it becomes lethal, heat can be insidious. It can creep up slowly, especially in environments where the air temperature is close to your body's core temperature. When the ambient temperature exceeds 95 degrees, your body can no longer shed heat through radiation. It has to rely entirely on evaporation, on sweating. And if the humidity is high, if sweat can't evaporate efficiently, your core temperature starts to rise. At first, you might just feel uncomfortable. You might kick off your blanket shift position, try to find a cooler spot on the mattress. But if the temperature keeps rising, if your core reaches 103 or 104 degrees, you enter the zone of heat exhaustion. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure drops. You might wake up drenched in sweat, disoriented, nauseated. And if you don't cool down, if your temperature climbs above 105, you're in danger of heat stroke, where the body's regulatory systems start to fail completely. Your brain swells, your organs shut down, and death becomes a real possibility. This happened to a young man in Phoenix in the summer of 2021. He fell asleep in his apartment with the air conditioning off, trying to save money on his electric bill. The temperature outside was 115 degrees. Inside, even at night, it was close to 100. He went to bed around midnight. By 3 in the morning, his core temperature had risen to 102. His body tried to cool itself. He sweated heavily, soaking his sheets. But the sweat couldn't evaporate fast enough. His temperature kept climbing. At some point, he woke up confused and disoriented. But by then, it was too late. He couldn't think clearly enough to recognize what was happening. He didn't call for help. He just lay there, and his body continued to overheat. A neighbor found him the next day dead from hyperthermia. His thermoreceptors had done their job. They'd sent the signals. They'd tried to wake him, but the heat had overwhelmed his body's ability to respond. These are extreme cases, worst-case scenarios, but they reveal something important. The temperature regulation system that protects you during sleep is powerful, but it's not infallible. It can be damaged by disease, compromised by substances like alcohol or drugs, or simply overwhelmed by environmental conditions that exceed its capacity to compensate. And most of the time, you never know how close you came to danger, because the system corrected the problem before it became serious. You woke up just cold enough, or just hot enough to take action, and you never thought twice about it. Let's explore the mechanics of how your body sheds heat during sleep, because it's more sophisticated than you might think. The primary method is through your skin, which acts as a radiator. Blood vessels near the surface of your skin dilate, allowing more blood to flow close to the surface where it can release heat into the air. This process is called vasodilation, and it happens automatically when your hypothalamus detects that your core temperature is rising. You've probably experienced this without realizing it. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with one leg sticking out from under the covers? That's your body trying to shed heat. The leg acts as a thermal exhaust, radiating warmth into the cooler air. You didn't consciously decide to do that. Your hypothalamus decided, and your body complied. But there's a secondary method that's just as important: your breath. Every time you exhale, you release warm, moist air from your lungs. And every time you inhale, you bring in cooler, drier air from the environment. Over the course of a night, this respiratory heat exchange can account for a significant amount of heat loss, especially in cold environments. This is why people who sleep in very cold conditions sometimes cover their faces with blankets or scarves. They're trying to warm the air they breathe to reduce the amount of heat they lose through respiration. But there's a trade-off. Covering your face can also reduce oxygen intake and increase carbon dioxide levels, which can disturb sleep quality. The body has to balance warmth against breathability, comfort against safety. Now, let's talk about something most people don't know: the relationship between core temperature and REM sleep. During REM, the stage of sleep where dreams are most vivid, your body's thermoregulation partially shuts down. The hypothalamus stops responding to temperature changes the way it normally does. You stop shivering. You stop sweating. Your body becomes essentially poikilothermic for a brief period, meaning its temperature is more influenced by the environment than by internal regulation. This is why REM sleep is so sensitive to ambient temperature. If the room is too hot or too cold, your brain will often cut REM short, pulling you into a lighter stage of sleep or waking you entirely. Your body prioritizes survival over dreaming. It will sacrifice the benefits of REM to avoid thermal danger. There's a fascinating study from the 1980s that demonstrated this. Researchers monitored people sleeping in temperature-controlled chambers and gradually changed the ambient temperature throughout the night. When the temperature was kept stable at around 68 degrees, people spent a normal amount of time in REM, about 20 to 25% of total sleep time. But when the temperature was raised to 75 degrees or lowered to 61 degrees, REM duration dropped by nearly half. The brain was spending less time in REM and more time in lighter stages of sleep, where thermoregulation could function normally. The participants didn't consciously notice this change. They didn't wake up thinking, "I had fewer dreams last night because it was too warm." But their bodies knew, their thermoreceptors knew, and they adjusted accordingly. Here's another layer. Your body's temperature regulation during sleep is influenced by your circadian rhythm, but it's also influenced by something called the thermal inertia of your sleeping environment. This is the tendency of your mattress, your blankets, your pillow, even the air trapped around your body to retain heat. When you first lie down, your body heat begins to warm these materials. Within 20 to 30 minutes, you've created a microclimate, a small pocket of warmer air and fabric that insulates you from the cooler ambient temperature. This microclimate is comfortable, even necessary in cold environments, but it can also become a trap in warm environments. If the room is too hot, if your body can't radiate heat into the microclimate because it's already saturated with warmth, you start to overheat. This is why some people wake up in the middle of the night feeling too hot, even though the room temperature hasn't changed. The microclimate has exceeded its capacity to absorb heat, and the body's only option is to escape it, to kick off the covers, to expose skin to the cooler air. There's also the phenomenon of night sweats, which many people experience occasionally, but few understand. Night sweats aren't just about being too warm. They can be triggered by a variety of factors: hormonal changes, especially during menopause infections, that cause fever, certain medications, even anxiety or stress. What happens is that your hypothalamus temporarily raises its set point, often in response to an immune response. Your body thinks it needs to be warmer than it actually is, so it starts generating heat. Your core temperature rises. And then suddenly, the set point drops back to normal. Your hypothalamus realizes the body is too hot and activates emergency cooling, massive vasodilation, and sweating. You wake up drenched, confused, sometimes cold, even though moments before you were too hot. The Guardian overreacted, made a mistake in calibration, and now has to compensate aggressively. It's unpleasant, but it's also a sign that the system is working, that it's actively trying to maintain thermal equilibrium, even when the parameters keep changing. Let's return to the evolutionary context, because it helps explain why this system is so sensitive, so vigilant. For most of human history, sleep was thermally challenging. Our ancestors didn't have climate-controlled bedrooms. They slept outside in caves and simple shelters that offered minimal protection from the elements. They had fire, yes, but fire goes out. It requires fuel maintenance attention. And so, the humans who survived were the ones whose bodies could regulate temperature effectively during sleep, who could detect dangerous cold or heat early enough to wake and take action. The ones who couldn't, the ones whose thermoreceptors were less sensitive, or whose hypothalamus was slower to respond, they died. They froze on cold nights or overheated on hot ones. And over thousands of generations, the system was refined, honed to be more responsive, more reliable, more capable of keeping you alive in the dark. But we've created a new problem, a modern problem. Central heating and air conditioning have made our sleeping environments more comfortable than ever before. We can set a thermostat and maintain a constant temperature all night. And while this is undeniably pleasant, it's also made us dependent. We've lost the hardiness that came from sleeping in variable temperatures. Our thermoreceptors are still vigilant, still sensitive, but they're no longer challenged the way they used to be. And some researchers worry that this could make us more vulnerable in emergency situations during power outages or natural disasters, when climate control is no longer available. Our bodies haven't forgotten how to regulate temperature, but they're out of practice. So, where does this leave us? What have we learned about the temperature guardian that watches over your sleep? We've learned that it's ancient, sensitive, and relentless. It monitors thousands of data points every second. It makes decisions faster than you can think. And it will wake you, pull you from sleep, sacrifice rest for survival if it detects a thermal threat. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for confirmation. It just acts because in the calculus of evolution, a disturbed night is better than a dead body. And yet, temperature is only one variable in the equation of sleep. There's another rhythm at work, another clock that's been ticking since the moment you were born, keeping time with the rotation of the Earth itself. This clock doesn't just track hours. It tracks light and darkness, wakefulness, and rest. It knows when you should sleep and when you should wake. And when danger approaches at the wrong time, when something tries to harm you during the hours you're meant to be unconscious, this clock sounds its own alarm. There's a cluster of cells in your brain, no bigger than a grain of rice, that's been counting the days since you were born. It tracks the sun even when you can't see it. It knows when dawn is coming, hours before light touches the horizon. It orchestrates the rise and fall of dozens of hormones, the ebb and flow of body temperature, the rhythm of hunger and alertness and sleep. This tiny structure called the suprachiasmatic nucleus is your master clock, the conductor of your circadian rhythm. And here's what makes it essential for survival. It doesn't just tell you when to sleep. It tells you when to be most vigilant, when danger is most likely, when your defenses need to be strongest. Even while you're unconscious, even in the deepest hours of the night, this clock is running a background calculation, a probability assessment of when something might try to hurt you. And when those dangerous hours arrive, your clock doesn't let you sleep as deeply. It keeps you closer to the surface, closer to waking, ready to respond. Because in the mathematics of evolution, the middle of the night is when predators hunt, and your body hasn't forgotten. Let's start with the science, because the circadian clock is one of the most precisely studied systems in biology. In 2017, three scientists, Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for their work on circadian rhythms. They discovered the genes, the actual DNA sequences that control the biological clock. These genes, called period timeless and clock, produce proteins that accumulate during the day and break down at night, creating a feedback loop that repeats roughly every 24 hours. And this loop exists in almost every cell in your body. Your liver has a clock, your heart has a clock, your muscles have clocks. But they're all synchronized by the master clock in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, which sits just above the optic chiasm where your optic nerves cross. That location isn't accidental. The SCN receives direct input from specialized cells in your retina that detect light, especially blue light from the sun. And that light is what keeps your internal clock aligned with the external world, with the rotation of the Earth, with day and night. But here's what most people don't understand. The circadian clock isn't just about sleep and wakefulness. It's about survival across the 24-hour cycle. Different times of day present different threats and opportunities, and your body adjusts its vigilance accordingly. During daylight hours, when predators are less active and visibility is high, your immune system is suppressed, slightly conserving energy. But as darkness falls, as the hours when you're most vulnerable approach, your immune system ramps up. Inflammatory markers increase. White blood cell production rises. Your body is preparing for the possibility of injury or infection, the kinds of dangers that historically were more likely to occur at night. And this preparation happens whether you're aware of it or not, driven by the clock, by the genes ticking in every cell. Now, let's talk about cortisol, because it's one of the most important hormones in this system, and one of the most misunderstood. Most people know cortisol as the stress hormone, the chemical your body releases when you're anxious or afraid. But cortisol has another role, one that's intimately connected to your circadian rhythm. Every morning, starting around 3 or 4 a.m., your cortisol levels begin to rise. They peak shortly after you wake up, usually within 30 to 60 minutes of opening your eyes. This is called the cortisol awakening response, and it's not about stress, it's about readiness. Cortisol increases alertness, mobilizes energy, prepares your body for the demands of the day. But it also does something else, something that reveals the clock's protective function. That early morning rise in cortisol, the one that happens while you're still asleep, is timed to coincide with the hours when humans are statistically most vulnerable to sudden death. There's a phenomenon in medicine called the dead of night effect. Studies of mortality rates show that deaths from cardiac arrest, stroke, and other acute medical events peak between 3 and 5 in the morning. This isn't random. It's the circadian clock at work. During these hours, your heart rate is at its lowest. Your blood pressure is at its lowest. Your body temperature has dropped. You're in the deepest phases of sleep, the hardest to wake from. And evolutionarily, this would have been the time when predators were most active, when enemies might attack a sleeping camp, when you needed to be ready to wake and respond instantly. So, your body in its ancient wisdom starts preparing you. It releases cortisol. It begins the slow process of bringing you back toward wakefulness, not enough to disturb your sleep, but enough to make you more responsive, more ready to act if danger appears. The clock is keeping watch, counting down the minutes until dawn, until safety. But what happens when you disrupt this clock? What happens when you force your body to be awake when it expects to be asleep, or asleep when it expects to be awake? The consequences are profound and often dangerous. Shift workers, people who work overnight and sleep during the day, experience this disruption constantly. Their suprachiasmatic nucleus is receiving conflicting signals. Light says it's daytime time to be awake, but the work schedule says it's nighttime time to sleep, and the clock doesn't know which signal to trust. Studies show that chronic shift workers have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and certain cancers. Their immune systems are weaker. Their cognitive function declines faster. and they're significantly more likely to be involved in accidents both at work and while driving. Why? Because their circadian vigilance is broken. The clock is trying to protect them, trying to increase alertness during dangerous hours, but it's calibrated to the wrong schedule. It's sounding alarms when there's no danger and staying silent when there is. There's a specific case that illustrates this tragically. In 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred at 1:23 in the morning. The reactor explosion, one of the worst nuclear accidents in history, was partly caused by human error. The operators were tired, working the night shift, making decisions at a time when their circadian clocks were telling them to sleep. Investigations later revealed that the operators had been awake for over 18 hours working through the night, and their reaction times were impaired, their judgment clouded. They made mistakes they might not have made during the day, missed warning signs that might have been obvious with a fully alert mind. The clock was trying to protect them, trying to tell them they were in the vulnerable hours, but the demands of the job overrode that protection, and the result was catastrophic. Now, let's shift to something more personal, something you've probably experienced. Have you ever woken up at 3 in the morning for no apparent reason? No noise, no discomfort, no obvious cause. You just opened your eyes and you were awake, lying in the dark, wondering why. This is your circadian clock at work, specifically a phenomenon called the cortisol spike. Around 3 a.m., as we discussed, your cortisol levels begin to rise. And in some people, that rise is steep enough, abrupt enough to cause partial arousal from sleep. You don't wake fully, but you surface from deep sleep into a lighter stage, and sometimes that's enough to bring you to consciousness. Ancient humans would have used this arousal to check their surroundings, to scan for threats, to make sure the fire was still burning, and the predators were still distant. You don't need to do any of that now. You're safe in your bed in your locked house. But your clock doesn't know that. It's still running the same program it's run for thousands of generations. Wake up, check. Make sure you're safe, and only then go back to sleep. There's another layer to this. The circadian clock modulates how deeply you sleep at different times of the night. During the early part of the night, roughly the first 4 hours after you fall asleep, you spend more time in deep slow-wave sleep. This is restorative sleep, the kind where your body does most of its physical repair. Your muscles rebuild, your bones strengthen, your immune system consolidates its defenses. But during the second half of the night, especially in the hours before dawn, you spend more time in REM sleep, the stage where dreams are vivid and your brain is highly active. And REM sleep is lighter than deep sleep. It's easier to wake from. This shift isn't accidental. Your clock is deliberately pulling you toward lighter sleep as dawn approaches, making you more responsive, more ready to wake if something threatens you during those final vulnerable hours. The night is a gradient from deep unconsciousness to shallow awareness, and the clock is the force driving that gradient. Let's talk about what happens when this system is pushed to its limits. Jet lag is the most common example. You fly across multiple time zones, and suddenly your external environment, the light-dark cycle, is out of sync with your internal clock. Your SCN is still calibrated to your home time zone, still releasing hormones and adjusting body temperature according to the old schedule. But the sun is rising and setting at different times. Your body doesn't know what to do. It tries to adapt, tries to reset the clock, but the process takes days. And during that adjustment period, your circadian vigilance is compromised. You're sleepy during the day when you should be alert. You're wide awake at night when you should be sleeping. And you're more vulnerable during the hours when your clock thinks you should be most vigilant, but when the local environment is actually safe, and vice versa. Travelers often report feeling anxious or uneasy during jet lag, and part of that is the clock misfiring, sending alarm signals at the wrong times, trying to protect you from dangers that don't exist. There's a darker application of this knowledge, sleep deprivation as torture. Throughout history, including recent history, interrogators have used circadian disruption as a tool to break down prisoners. They keep lights on constantly, or they wake prisoners every few hours, preventing them from completing full sleep cycles. The body's clock becomes unmoored. The prisoner loses track of time. They don't know if it's day or night if they've been awake for hours or days. And this disorientation, this loss of circadian rhythm, is profoundly destabilizing. The clock is one of the anchors that keeps you connected to reality. When it's broken, when it can't tell you when to be alert and when to rest, you start to lose your sense of self. This isn't just psychological, it's physiological. The clock is part of your identity, part of what makes you a coherent organism moving through time. And when it's disrupted, you fragment. But let's return to normal life, to the way the clock protects you during ordinary sleep. There's something beautiful about the precision of this system. Your SCN contains about 20,000 neurons, and they're all synchronized, all firing in a coordinated rhythm. During the day, they fire rapidly, sending signals that promote wakefulness. At night, they're firing slows, allowing sleep. But even during sleep, they don't stop. They keep time, they keep counting, and they monitor other systems, checking for abnormalities, for signs that something is wrong. If your heart rate becomes irregular, if your breathing stops, if your blood oxygen drops, the SCN receives that information and can trigger a waking response. It's not just a clock, it's a sentinel using time as a framework to assess whether your body is functioning normally. There's a specific gene involved in this called PER2, one of the period genes that Hall-Rosbach and Young studied. Mutations in PER2 have been linked to a condition called familial advanced sleep phase syndrome, where people fall asleep extremely early around 6 or 7 p.m. and wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. Their clocks are running fast, out of sync with the rest of society. But what's interesting is that these people often report feeling vulnerable in the early morning hours between 3 and 5 a.m., even though they're awake and alert. Their clocks are telling them it's time to be vigilant, time to watch for danger, but there's nothing to watch for. The external world is still asleep. It's a mismatch between internal time and external time, and it creates a low-level anxiety, a sense that something isn't right. The clock is doing its job, but the job doesn't match the environment anymore. Now let's consider the role of light in all of this, because light is the primary synchronizer of the circadian clock. The specialized cells in your retina, called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, detect blue light specifically. When they're activated, they send signals directly to the SCN, telling it that it's daytime. And the SCN uses this information to reset the clock, to align the internal rhythm with the external day-night cycle. But modern life has introduced a new problem: artificial light. We're exposed to screens, to LED bulbs, to blue, rich light long after the sun has set. And our SCNs interpret this light as daytime. They suppress melatonin, the hormone that promotes sleep. They keep us in a state of alertness when our bodies should be winding down. And this chronic exposure to nighttime light disrupts the clock's ability to maintain its protective rhythm. We're less vigilant during the hours we should be most vigilant because the clock thinks it's still daytime, still safe. There's research showing that people who use screens extensively in the hours before bed have more fragmented sleep, wake more frequently, and report feeling less rested in the morning. But there's also evidence that they're more vulnerable to threats during sleep. Their arousal thresholds are different. It takes louder sounds or stronger stimuli to wake them during the early morning hours, when the cortisol spike should be making them more responsive. The clock is confused, and that confusion has consequences for safety. Let's talk about one final aspect of circadian vigilance: the relationship between the clock and memory. The hippocampus. The part of your brain that forms long-term memories is heavily influenced by circadian rhythms. During certain phases of the sleep cycle, especially during REM sleep in the early morning, the hippocampus replays events from the day, consolidating them into stable memories. But it doesn't replay everything equally. It prioritizes emotionally significant events, especially those related to threat or danger. If you encountered something frightening during the day, if you had a near-miss accident or a tense confrontation, the hippocampus will replay that event more frequently during sleep. It's trying to learn from the experience, trying to make sure you remember it so you can avoid similar dangers in the future. And the circadian clock modulates this process, timing the replays to occur during the hours when you're most likely to need that information, during the vulnerable hours before dawn. This is why trauma often manifests in early morning nightmares. People with PTSD frequently wake between 3 and 5 a.m., the exact window when the circadian clock is increasing vigilance and the hippocampus is replaying threatening memories. The two systems reinforce each other. The clock says, "Be alert, danger is possible." The hippocampus says, "Remember this threat." And the result is a nightmare so vivid it feels real, so intense it pulls you from sleep. The guardians are trying to protect you, but they're protecting you from memories, from dangers that already happened, that can't hurt you anymore. The system is working as designed, but the design was never meant for a world where threats can be psychological rather than physical. So, here we are, creatures of time, governed by a clock we can't see or hear, protected by rhythms we never consciously notice. The SCN has been ticking since before you were aware of yourself, and it will keep ticking until the moment you die. It knows when you're most vulnerable. It knows when to increase your defenses and when to let you rest. It's not perfect. It can be disrupted, confused, broken by the demands of modern life, but it's always trying to keep you alive through the dangerous hours to bring you safely to morning. And yet, the clock is not the only protector working in darkness. There's one more guardian we haven't met, one that operates in a realm stranger than any we've explored so far. It lives in your dreams, in the landscapes of sleep, where logic dissolves and reality bends. And in that realm, it's running simulations, rehearsing disasters, preparing you for threats you hope will never come. You're running through a building you've never seen before, down hallways that shift and change, chased by something you can't quite see. Your legs feel heavy like you're moving through water. You try to scream, but no sound comes out. Doors appear and disappear. The walls close in. And then you wake up, heart-pounding breath, quick lying safe in your bed, with no idea why your mind just put you through that terror. Most people think dreams are random, meaningless noise, the brain's way of processing the day's leftovers. But there's a theory supported by decades of research that suggests something far more purposeful. Your dreams, especially the frightening ones, might be training simulations. They might be your brain's way of rehearsing danger, of practicing survival, of keeping you ready for threats that haven't happened yet, but someday might. And while you sleep while you're lost in these strange scenarios, your amygdala is wide awake, learning, adapting, building a library of responses that could one day save your life. Let's begin with a number that sounds almost unbelievable. Approximately 75% of dreams contain negative or threatening content, not pleasant dreams, not neutral ones, threatening ones. Dreams where you're being chased, where you're falling, where you're lost, where something bad is about to happen. This statistic comes from research conducted by Antti Revonsuo, a Finnish neuroscientist who spent decades studying dream content across different cultures and age groups. And what he found was consistent, regardless of where people lived, regardless of their backgrounds or life circumstances. The majority of their dreams involve some element of threat, conflict, or danger. Why would that be? If dreams were just random neural firing, if they were just the brain entertaining itself during downtime, you'd expect a more even distribution. Some threatening dreams, yes, but also plenty of pleasant ones, neutral ones, boring ones. But that's not what the data shows. The data shows a strong bias toward threat. And Revonsuo proposed an explanation: dreams are not random, they're simulations. Your brain is using sleep to practice scenarios that might be dangerous, to rehearse responses, to train you for survival. He called this the threat simulation theory. And it's one of the most compelling explanations for why we dream the way we do. The idea is simple throughout human evolution. Survival depended on being able to recognize and respond to threats quickly. A predator approaching, a rival attacking, a cliff edge too close. The humans who were good at this, who could react instantly and appropriately, lived long enough to have children. The ones who weren't, who hesitated or froze or made the wrong choice, died. And so, natural selection favored brains that could practice threat response, that could run simulations during sleep, and improve performance during waking life. Dreams in this view are not entertainment, they're training exercises. And the amygdala, your brain's fear center, is the instructor. Now, let's talk about what happens in your brain during REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreaming occurs. Your cortex. The thinking part of your brain is highly active, almost as active as it is when you're awake. It's generating images, narratives, sensations, weaving them together into what feels like a coherent experience. But other parts of your brain are also active, and some of them are working harder than they do during waking life. The amygdala, that small almond-shaped structure deep in your temporal lobe, shows activity levels during REM that are 30% higher than when you're awake. 30%. This is the part of your brain responsible for detecting threats, for triggering fear, responses for deciding when to run and when to fight. And during your dreams, it's hyperactive, constantly scanning the dream environment for danger, constantly evaluating threats, constantly practicing the emotional and physiological responses you'd need in a real emergency. There's more. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic planning and reality testing, shows decreased activity during REM. This is why dreams feel real even when they're absurd. Your prefrontal cortex isn't questioning the narrative. It's not saying, wait, this doesn't make sense. It's offline, or at least dimmed. And in that dim state, the amygdala has more influence. It can shape the dream, inject threat scenarios, push you into situations that trigger fear or stress. And you experience those situations as if they were real, complete with the racing heart, the surge of adrenaline, the overwhelming urge to escape. Your body is responding to a threat that exists only in your mind, but the response is genuine, the learning is genuine. And when you wake up, when the dream fades, some part of that training remains. Let's look at specific examples because they reveal patterns. One of the most common dream themes across all cultures is being chased. You're running from someone, and you can't get away. Your legs don't work right. You're moving in slow motion. The pursuer is always just behind you, always catching up. Why is this dream so universal? Revansuo would argue it's because being chased was one of the most common threats in ancestral environments. Predators, rival groups, dangerous animals. And learning to escape, learning to navigate under pressure was a survival skill. So, your brain simulates it over and over, refining your responses, building neural pathways that might activate in a real chase situation. You might never be chased by a predator in your waking life, but if some emergency required you to run, to think quickly, to navigate obstacles while terrified, your brain would have practiced, it would have rehearsed, and you'd be more likely to survive. Another common dream falling. You're standing somewhere high, or maybe you're just floating, and then suddenly you're dropping, plummeting, with no way to stop. And you wake up with a jolt, your body tense, your heart racing. This dream taps into one of the most primal fears, the fear of falling, of losing control, of hitting the ground. For early humans, especially those who slept in trees or on cliffs, falling was a real and lethal danger. And so, the brain evolved to be hyper-vigilant about it, to practice the sensation, to keep the fear sharp. Even now, even though most of us sleep safely on the ground, the dream persists. The amygdala remembers. It won't let you forget. Now, let's talk about a specific population where threat simulation theory becomes even more apparent: children. Young children, especially between the ages of 3 and 7, have more nightmares than adults. They dream about monsters, about being abandoned, about getting lost, about creatures hiding in the dark. And while parents often interpret these dreams as signs of anxiety or stress, Revansuo suggests they might be something else training. Children are learning about the world, learning what's dangerous and what's safe. And their brains are using dreams to accelerate that learning, to expose them to threats in a controlled environment. where the consequences aren't real. A child who dreams about a monster and learns to feel fear to recognize the physiological response is a child who might react more quickly to real danger. The nightmares are unpleasant, yes, but they might also be protective. There's a study from the early 2000s that supports this. Researchers interviewed children about their dreams and then tracked them over several years, monitoring their ability to recognize and respond to dangerous situations in waking life. Children who reported frequent nightmares were on average better at identifying potential hazards. They were more cautious in unfamiliar environments. They showed faster reaction times when presented with simulated threats. The nightmares had trained them, made them more vigilant, more prepared. And while correlation doesn't prove causation, the pattern is suggestive. The brain might be using fear during sleep to build confidence during waking. But what about people who've experienced real trauma? People with PTSD often have recurring nightmares, replaying the traumatic event over and over, sometimes with variations, but always with the same core of terror. These dreams are distressing, debilitating, one of the signature symptoms of the disorder. And they don't seem to fit the threat simulation theory. If dreams are supposed to be helpful, supposed to prepare you for danger, why would they torture trauma survivors with endless replays of the worst moments of their lives? Revan Suo addressed this directly. He argued that PTSD nightmares are the system malfunctioning, not functioning. The brain is trying to process the trauma, trying to make sense of it, trying to integrate it into the library of threat responses. But the trauma is too intense, too overwhelming. The amygdala can't categorize it properly. And so, it keeps replaying it, hoping that repetition will somehow reduce the threat, will somehow make it manageable. But it doesn't work. The threat remains, the fear remains, and the nightmares continue. This is one of the tragic vulnerabilities of the Dream Guardian. It's trying to help, trying to use the tools evolution gave it, but those tools weren't designed for the kinds of trauma modern humans can experience. Car accidents, combat, assault. These are threats of a different magnitude, a different quality than what the system evolved to handle. And when faced with them, the Guardian sometimes breaks. It becomes part of the problem instead of part of the solution. Let's shift to the biology for a moment, because understanding what's happening in your brain during these dream simulations helps clarify why they feel so real. During REM sleep, your brainstem actively paralyzes your voluntary muscles. This is called REM atonia, and it's a protective mechanism. It prevents you from acting out your dreams, from thrashing around, from injuring yourself or others while you're lost in a nightmare. But your involuntary muscles still work. Your heart still beats, and it beats faster during threatening dreams. Your breathing still functions, and it quickens during moments of dream fear. Your adrenal glands still release cortisol and adrenaline. Your body is responding as if the threat were real, even though your conscious mind will eventually wake up and realize it wasn't. This is the simulation working. Your amygdala is sending signals: danger, respond, prepare, and your body obeys. There's a rare condition that reveals just how important REM atonia is. It's called REM sleep behavior disorder, and it occurs when the brainstem mechanism that paralyzes muscles during REM fails. People with this disorder act out their dreams physically. They punch, kick, run, fight invisible enemies. And they can hurt themselves or their sleeping partners in the process. But what's fascinating from a threat simulation perspective is what they dream about. Almost universally, people with REM sleep behavior disorder report dreams involving physical confrontation, being attacked, fighting back, defending themselves or others. These aren't peaceful dreams, they're combat scenarios. And the body's response, without the paralysis to restrain it, becomes visible. The simulation breaks through into reality, and you can see what the brain has been practicing all along survival. Now, let's talk about lucid dreaming, because it offers a unique window into the dream rehearsal process. Lucid dreaming is when you become aware that you're dreaming while the dream is still happening. You realize, this isn't real, I'm asleep. And in that moment of awareness, some people can exert control over the dream, can change the narrative, can fly or teleport or reshape the environment. But here's what's interesting, even in lucid dreams, the amygdala often remains active. Even when you know the dream isn't real, even when you're consciously manipulating it, your body still responds to threatening content with fear. Your heart rate still increases, your palms still sweat. The simulation continues bypassing your rational knowledge that it's just a dream. This suggests that the protective function of dreams operates at a level deeper than consciousness, at a level where knowing doesn't matter, where only practicing matters. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute in Germany studied this in the early 2010s. They trained participants to achieve lucid dreaming, and then monitored their brain activity during lucid dreams that contain threatening scenarios. Even when participants reported feeling in control, even when they said they weren't afraid, because they knew it was a dream, their amygdala showed high activity. The fear circuit was engaged. The rehearsal was happening. And this raises a profound question. Maybe the point of dream rehearsal isn't to consciously learn. Maybe it's to train the automatic systems, the reflexive responses, the parts of you that act before you think. Because in a real emergency, there's no time to think. There's only time to react. And dreams make sure those reactions are ready. Let's consider one more aspect: recurring dreams. Many people have a dream that comes back again and again, sometimes for years. The setting might change, the details might vary, but the core scenario is the same. You're back in school, unprepared for a test. You're trying to get somewhere, but can't find the way. You're in danger, but your voice doesn't work. Why do these dreams repeat? One possibility is that they're rehearsing a specific type of threat or challenge that your brain considers particularly important. The test dream might be about performance anxiety, about the fear of failure under scrutiny. The lost dream might be about navigation, about finding your way in unfamiliar territory. The voiceless dream might be about powerlessness, about situations where you can't communicate or call for help. And your brain keeps running these simulations because it considers them unresolved, because it wants to make sure you're prepared if something similar happens in waking life. There's a case study from the 1990s that illustrates this beautifully. A man in his 30s reported having the same nightmare for over 20 years. He was in a burning building, trying to escape, but the exits kept disappearing. The dream terrified him, ruined his sleep, affected his quality of life. And then one day he was in an office building when a fire broke out. Real smoke, real flames, real danger. And according to his later testimony, he didn't panic. He moved calmly, efficiently, checking exits, guiding others, getting out safely. And afterward, the nightmare stopped. It never came back. His brain had been preparing him for that exact scenario, rehearsing it for 2 decades. And when the real emergency arrived, when the simulation became reality, he was ready. The Guardian had done its job. The rehearsal was complete. So, what does all of this mean for you, lying in bed drifting through dreams you'll barely remember? It means that while you sleep, while your conscious mind is absent, another part of you is working. Training, practicing, building a catalog of threats and responses. Your amygdala is running scenarios, some based on real experiences, some on primal fears, some on anxieties you can't even name. And it's not asking for permission. It's not waiting for your approval. It's just doing what evolution designed it to do, keeping you ready, keeping you sharp, keeping you alive. The nightmares might be unpleasant. They might wake you in the early hours confused and afraid. But they're also evidence that your brain hasn't given up on protecting you, that even in the realm of dreams, even where logic dissolves, the Guardians are still watching. And now, after this long journey through the quiet senses, through skin and sound and smell, through balance and temperature and time, through the strange rehearsals of sleep, we arrive at the final question. What does it all mean? What are we to make of this invisible army that guards us in the dark? So, here we are at the end of this journey through the hidden life of sleep. We've traveled through layers of awareness you probably never knew existed, met guardians you've never consciously thanked, explored systems that have been protecting you since before you had memories. And if you're still listening, still here in the quiet of this moment, maybe you're wondering, what does it all add up to? What's the larger truth beneath these individual facts, these separate systems, these quiet sentinels working in the dark? The answer, if there is one, might be simpler and stranger than you'd expect. You are never alone. Not really, not in the way you think about loneliness. Because even when everyone else has gone, even when the house is silent and the world feels empty, there's an entire civilization inside you that never sleeps, never rests, never stops watching over you. And that civilization has been there all along, waiting for you to notice. Let's pull back and look at the full picture, because the individual pieces we've explored, skin and ears and nose and balance and temperature and circadian rhythms and dreams, they're not separate systems. They're parts of a network, a coordinated defense that operates across every level of your biology. Think of it like a city at night. Most of the citizens are asleep, but the city itself is still alive. The power plants are running. The water is flowing. The emergency services are on standby. The traffic lights are cycling through their patterns. And if something goes wrong, if a fire breaks out or a storm threatens, there are systems in place to wake the right people to mobilize the right resources to keep everyone safe until morning. Your body works the same way. While your conscious mind sleeps, while the parts of you that think and plan and worry drift into darkness, the infrastructure keeps running. And it's managed by the oldest parts of your brain, the parts that existed before language, before civilization, before anything you'd recognize as human thought. This is the brainstem, the limbic system, the autonomic nervous system. These are the managers of your internal city, and they're very good at their jobs. They've been doing this work for millions of years, refining their protocols, learning from every generation that survived long enough to pass on their genes. And the protocols they follow are surprisingly sophisticated. They don't just react to threats, they anticipate them. They run probability calculations based on time of day, based on patterns in your environment, based on the history stored in your DNA. And they adjust your sleep accordingly, keeping you deeper when you're safe, pulling you lighter when you might not be. Let's talk about integration, because that's where the real genius of this system reveals itself. Your skin detects a change in temperature. That signal goes to your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus checks with your circadian clock to see what time it is. The clock says it's 3 in the morning, the vulnerable hours. The hypothalamus decides this temperature change might be significant, might be worth investigating. It sends a signal to your brainstem, which slightly increases your cortisol levels, pulling you toward lighter sleep. You don't wake up. You don't need to. But now you're closer to the surface, more responsive. And if another signal comes in a sound or a smell or a shift in position, the combined weight of those signals might push you over the threshold into waking. This is layered security. This is redundancy. This is a system designed not to fail. But here's what makes it beautiful. Most of the time, you never know this is happening. You sleep through the night, unaware of the thousands of micro decisions being made on your behalf, the constant monitoring, the subtle adjustments. You wake up in the morning feeling rested, and you have no idea how much work went into keeping you safe while you were gone. The guardians ask nothing. They expect nothing. They just do their work silently, efficiently, because that's what they were built to do. Now let's address something important, something that might be troubling you if you've been paying close attention. We've spent this entire journey talking about threats, about dangers, about all the ways your body is watching for things that might hurt you. And that might make it sound like sleep is a dangerous state, like you're vulnerable, like you should be afraid. But that's not the lesson here. The lesson is the opposite. You're not vulnerable during sleep. You're protected, deeply, thoroughly by systems that are older and wiser than your conscious mind will ever be. Yes, there are threats in the world. There always have been. But your body knows this. It's prepared. And the fact that you can sleep at all, The fact that you can surrender consciousness for hours every night and wake up safe, that's not luck. That's not chance. That's the result of millions of years of evolution of natural selection, filtering out every design flaw, every vulnerability, until what remained was a system capable of protecting you even from yourself. There's a philosophical dimension to this worth exploring. For most of human history, people believed that sleep was a kind of death, a dangerous surrender of the self to forces beyond control. The Greeks called sleep the brother of death. Medieval Europeans feared that demons or spirits might steal the soul of a sleeping person. Even now, in casual language, we talk about losing consciousness as if something is being taken from us. But the science tells a different story. When you sleep, you don't lose consciousness. You shift it. You move it to a different mode, a deeper mode, where the ancient parts of you take over. And those ancient parts are not your enemies. They're your ancestors, your inheritance, the accumulated wisdom of every organism that came before you and lived long enough to reproduce. They know things your waking mind has forgotten. They remember dangers you've never personally encountered, and they're still protecting you from those dangers just in case. Let's ground this in a real example, a story that brings all the threads together. In 2003, a family in Colorado was asleep in their home when a gas leak developed in their basement. Natural gas, odorless, but for the chemical additive mercaptan that gives it that distinctive sulfur smell. The leak was slow, gradual, filling the house over several hours. The father woke first around 4 in the morning. He didn't know why he was awake. He just was. And lying there in the dark, he noticed a smell. Faint, strange, wrong. His olfactory system had detected it, flagged it was dangerous, woken him. He got up, investigated, found the leak, and evacuated his family before the gas concentration reached dangerous levels. Later, when interviewed, he said he had no idea what woke him. He just felt uneasy. But we know what woke him. His nose woke him. His circadian clock woke him because it was the vulnerable hours and his arousal threshold was lower. His amygdala woke him because the smell matched a pattern associated with threat. All the guardians worked together, coordinated without conscious input, and saved his family's life. This is not a metaphor. This is how the system works. Now, let's talk about gratitude because there's something deeply moving about realizing how much is being done for you while you're unaware. Every night you go to sleep, trusting that you'll wake up. And you do. Every single night, for your entire life, you've woken up. That's not inevitable. That's not guaranteed. People die in their sleep. Yes, but it's rare. Far rarer than it should be given how vulnerable unconsciousness makes us. And the reason it's rare is because of these guardians, these systems we've been exploring. They're the reason you're still here. They're the reason humanity made it out of the caves, out of the trees, out of the primordial darkness where sleep meant death. We learned to sleep safely because we evolved systems that could protect us while we slept. And those systems are still with us, still working, still watching. There's a meditation practice in some Buddhist traditions where you lie down and mentally thank each part of your body for the work it does. Thank your feet for carrying you. Thank your hands for holding things. Thank your heart for beating. And if you were to extend that practice to the systems we've talked about tonight, you might say, thank you to my skin for staying awake while I sleep. Thank you to my ears for filtering the noise and keeping only what matters. Thank you to my nose for knowing what danger smells like. Thank you to my vestibular system for keeping me from falling. Thank you to my thermoregulation for managing the delicate balance of temperature. Thank you to my circadian clock for tracking time when I can't. Thank you to my amygdala for rehearsing nightmares, so I'm ready for waking dangers. You don't have to believe in any particular philosophy to appreciate the elegance of this. You just have to pay attention. But let's also acknowledge the limits because honesty matters. These systems are not perfect. They can fail, they can be overwhelmed, they can be damaged by disease, by injury, by the sheer brutality of modern life. People die in their sleep from carbon monoxide poisoning because their noses can't detect it. People die from sleep apnea because their breathing regulation falters. People die from nighttime cardiac events because their hearts give out during the vulnerable hours. The Guardians try. They do everything they were designed to do. But sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes the threat is too novel, too intense, too far outside the parameters evolution prepared them for. And when that happens, when the system fails, it's not because the Guardians stopped caring. It's because they were asked to do something they were never built to do. This is why we need technology. Why we need smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors and medical monitoring devices. These tools extend the reach of our biological guardians, compensate for their blind spots, give us warnings that our senses alone can't provide. And that's not a failure of biology. That's human beings doing what we do best, recognizing our limitations and building tools to overcome them. The guardians inside you have brought you this far. Technology can take you further. Together, they're a more complete defense than either could provide alone. Now, let's return to where we started, to the child sleeping through the thunderstorm. She's still there, still breathing slowly, still lost in dreams. And now, you know what you didn't know before she's not unprotected. She's surrounded by guardians. Her skin is monitoring every pressure point. Her ears are filtering every sound. Her nose is sampling every breath. Her vestibular system is tracking her position. Her temperature regulation is keeping her in the narrow zone where life persists. Her circadian clock is counting down to morning, and her amygdala is running simulations preparing her for dangers she hasn't yet encountered. She looks vulnerable, but she's not. She's guarded by an invisible army that's been refining its tactics for millions of years. And when morning comes, when she wakes up safe and stretches and starts her day, she'll never think about any of this. She'll never thank the guardians. She'll never know how many times they protected her during the night. And that's okay. They don't need thanks. They just need her to keep breathing, keep sleeping, keep trusting that when she closes her eyes, something will watch over her in the dark. So, what about you? What about your sleep? Your guardians, your invisible army? Have you been paying attention? Have you noticed the small miracles, the moments when you woke for no reason, and then realized there was a reason? The times when your body knew something before your mind did? Or have you been taking it all for granted, assuming safety is default, assuming protection is automatic? Because it's not automatic. It's the result of unimaginable complexity of systems layered upon systems of feedback loops and fail-safes and redundancies that would put any human engineering to shame. And all of it is happening inside you right now as you listen to these words. Your guardians are working. They're always working. And they'll keep working until the very end, until the final night when sleep and death finally converge and there's nothing left to guard. But that night is not this night. This night you're still here. Still breathing, still protected. And when you close your eyes, when you drift away into sleep, you can do so knowing that you're not alone. You're surrounded, guarded, watched over by systems that are older than cities, older than civilizations, older than language itself. They know things you don't. They remember things you've forgotten. And they're on your side, always asking nothing, expecting nothing. Just doing their work in silence because that's what they were made to do. Sleep well, dream gently, trust the guardians. They've kept you safe every night of your life, and they'll keep you safe for all the nights to come. You are never truly alone in the dark. You're accompanied by millions of years of evolution, by the wisdom of every ancestor who survived long enough to pass their genes to you. And that's not just science. That's something close to grace. Thank you for staying with me through this long, quiet journey. Thank you for listening with patience and curiosity. And if this story found you when you needed it, if it changed how you think about sleep or safety or the hidden life of your own body, then it did what it was meant to do. There are more stories to tell, more quiet corners of science to explore. And when the next one is ready, when the next journey begins, I hope you'll be here again, ready to drift through the darkness together. Until then, rest well. The guardians are watching. They always are. Good night.